Today's artefact from the Great War Huts collection will be of particular interest to uniform collectors, those of you with a generic interest in the uniforms of the First World War, and hopefully to all the rest of you as well. This is in fact one of the rarest surviving pieces of British uniform of the First World War. It's a 1909 pattern dismounted British soldier's greatcoat, and these are incredibly rare. Introduced, as you'd expect, in 1909, it was single-breasted. It had these turned-back cuffs, rifle patches on the shoulders, pretty much exactly the same as the service dress jacket, and this very distinctive small ticket pocket just above the right-hand pocket. Once the war had broken out, suddenly it was all about economising, it was about saving fabric, and it was about simplification. So very quickly, the greatcoats start to be made with no rifle patches, with no ticket pockets and no turn-back cuffs. And that simplified pattern of greatcoat would pretty much then be in use for all of the rest of the war. The 1909 patterns do still crop up. There's no shortage of them in photographs. They were certainly worn side by side, and certainly they were used until all of the stocks have run out. But the reason that these coats are so rare is that in 1919 the British government appealed to old soldiers, many of whom had gone home in their uniform with the greatcoats, that if they took their greatcoat to a police station or to a railway station, they could hand them in and be given a voucher which they could exchange for £1. Almost certainly all of those coats went off to Russia, to the White Russians during the Russian Civil War, and as far as most soldiers were concerned, they were sick of the sight of khaki, and the idea of making £1 for a bit of government equipment certainly appealed, and they literally disappeared. Nearly all of them disappeared almost overnight, which makes this an incredibly rare survivor. Now, I've known about this coat for a very long time. In the mid-1990s, it was one of the items put into auction by the Suffolk Regiment Museum. And so clearly, the assumption was that it had Suffolk Regiment provenance, and I knew who'd bought it, a fellow collector who'd had it ever since. But in 2018, he said to me, out of the blue, that he was prepared to part with it, and came up here to Great War Huts, and we did the deal, and now it's part of the Great War Huts collection. And what was interesting about it was that, certainly it needed a bit of detective work, because in the inside, written on one of the pockets, actually on both of the pockets either side, you won't see it there, but was the fella's name. It was Glover, Glover. Now, that was all there was. There was no service number, nothing else. And in the normal run of things, it would be almost impossible then to track him down. You could do a bit of guesswork, but there were quite a few Glovers who'd served with the Suffolk Regiment. But what was interesting was that on the shoulder straps, there were 4 holes on either side in a square pattern. Now, there's only one regiment that wore a shoulder title which had 4 lugs that would correspond with that, and that was the Sherwood Foresters, or the Notts and Derbies Regiment. And if you take a Notts and Derbies shoulder title and sit it on the shoulder strap, those lugs line up exactly with the holes in the shoulder strap. So there's no doubt whatsoever that at some point this greatcoat had been worn by a soldier who'd served with the Notts and Derbies. So I went back and double-checked the soldiers died in the Great War database, and this time I discovered John William Glover, who'd been born on the 31st of July 1897 and was living in Whitaker Street in Derby when the war broke out. And he'd served with 1st Battalion, the Sherwood Foresters, but at some point during the war he transferred to 2nd Battalion Suffolk Regiment. On the 26th of September 1917, 2nd Suffolk attacked at Zonnebecker, across the parkland now where the chateau is, and they'd captured the chateau and captured the church, and at some point during that day, John Glover had been severely wounded. He was taken back to a dressing station, but he died there on the 30th of September 1917. He was buried in Menin Road South Cemetery on the outskirts of Ypres, where he rests to this day. His coat is a remarkable survivor. After the war, the family must have just left it hanging in a wardrobe or packed it away in a drawer until at some point they'd sent it off to the Suffolk Regiment Museum, where it remained until it was sold off in the 1990s. We're incredibly fortunate to have it, and we'll be very proud to display it along with John's story.